I've been told that is a clay material or something that just dissolves on explosion. No projectile comes out.
Now, this article, you can't see it here. There we go. Charges against Alec Baldwin could be refiled as forensic report shows trigger on gun used in Rust shooting had to be pulled. Okay, so this is from CNN Entertainment. Charges against Alec Baldwin could be refiled as the forensic report shows the trigger on the gun used in Rust shooting had to be pulled. Well, okay, the FBI report previously said exactly the same thing. So let's see what the difference is between now and then. So if you remember, the charges were filed and then they were later dropped because of the assertion that the weapon had been manipulated, had been somehow tampered with in such a way that it would fire without pulling the trigger. And they dismissed the charges against Baldwin and said that they could possibly refile later if additional evidence came. Well, maybe this is it. We'll just have to see. Independent testing on the weapon used in the fatal 2021 shooting on the set of the film Rust shows the trigger had to be pulled. Okay, the gun fired normally and it did not malfunction, according to a report filed in court, raising the possibility charges could be refiled against actor Alec Baldwin. Don't hold your breath. I don't think they should have been dismissed in the first place, but don't hold your breath about them being refiled again. The fired evidence cartridge is the consequence of a normal hammer fall from a fully cocked position of the hammer, the report compiled by the Forensic Science Service of Arizona states. The report was filed as part of a defense motion on behalf of the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who is charged with tampering with the gun used in shooting, as well as 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Baldwin has maintained he pulled back the gun's hammer as far as he could without cocking the gun and released the hammer, but did not pull the trigger. Now, see, again, the way this weapon is set up is if you pull it back 25% of it, there's a quarter cock. If you pull it back a quarter of the way to full, it has like a little locking bar that locks into place. So even if it's pulled back a quarter of the way, the hammer won't drop. It has a quarter cock, a half cock, and a full cock. How many times can I say cock in one time? How many times can I say cock in one sentence? So there's quarter cock, half cock, and full cock. So he was saying he pulled it back as far as he could. So in other words, he was saying he pulled it back less than 25%. That is a very, very small margin. So I don't believe that at all. Nobody else does matter. Baldwin was maintained he pulled back that gun's hammer as far as he could without cocking the gun and released the hammer, but did not pull the trigger. CNN calls to him for comment on the report were not immediately returned. Oh, he's not returning comments. Surprise. He hasn't stopped talking about this. The October 2021 shooting on a New Mexico film set killed cinematographer Helena Hutchins and injured director Joel Souza. They were struck by a live round of ammunition fired from a prop gun held by Baldwin while rehearsing a scene, officials have said. The new testing by examiners in New Mexico was conducted using a replacement hammer, trigger, sear, and bolt, according to their report, rather than the gun's original components. The weapon, broken during testing run by the FBI and inoperable when Forensic Science Services got it, then was returned to operable condition. So they're saying that the FBI broke the weapon during testing. Well, what that means, and if you read the FBI report, which we did way back in the dark ages, if you go back and watch that stream, the FBI tried so hard to replicate what Alec Baldwin said happened that they actually broke the gun trying to get it to do what Alec Baldwin said it would do. And it didn't, obviously. So yeah, they tried so hard to get it to fire without pulling the trigger that it broke. So these guys, they returned it to operable condition and ran these tests. Involuntary manslaughter charges against Baldwin lodged in January were dismissed in April when special prosecutors Karen Morrissey and Jason Lewis said charges could be refiled. A final decision has not been made, Morrissey told CNN on Wednesday. Alec had problems with his cock. Nice. That's good. The charges against Alec Baldwin were dismissed without prejudice because a possible malfunction of the gun significantly affects causation with regard to Baldwin, not with regard to Gutierrez. If it's determined that the gun did not malfunction, charges against Mr. Baldwin will proceed with a final charging decision within the next 60 days, prosecutors said in a June court filing. So they don't have much longer to decide if they're going to refile charges. If a new charge is filed against Baldwin, the actor's defense team likely would focus on the structural integrity of the gun at the time of the shooting. Although Alec Baldwin repeatedly denies pulling the trigger, given the tests, findings, and observations reported here, the trigger had to be pulled or depressed sufficiently to release the fully cocked or retracted hammer of the evidence revolver, the report states. So again, the FBI said it, and now this independent testing has said there is no way that that weapon would have fired unless Alec Baldwin cocked it and then pulled the trigger. If the hammer had not been fully retracted to the rear and were to slip from the handler's thumb without the trigger depressed, the half-cock or quarter-cock notches in the hammer would have prevented the firing pin from reaching any cartridge in the firing chamber it read. So that's what I was saying. If you pull it back past a quarter and you let it go, it'll get caught on the quarter bar. If you pull it back more than halfway and let it go, it'll get caught on the half-cock bar. And the hammer will not strike the cartridge. It is impossible. And from an examination of the fired cartridge case and the operationally restored evidence revolver, this fatal incident was the consequence of the hammer being manually retracted to its fully rearward and cocked position, followed at some point by the pull or rearward depression of the trigger, the report said. That report, independent report, is just flat out saying he pulled it back to full cock and he pulled the trigger. The only conceivable alternative to which the foregoing would be a situation in which the trigger was already pulled or held rearward while retracting the hammer to its fully cocked position, although unlikely and totally contrary to the normal operation of these single-action revolvers. Such improper handling would result in the discharge of a live cartridge, it added. Investigators have not determined how or why live rounds were on the set of the movie. So there we are. That's the Baldwin story. That's the Baldwin deal. They did this test. It is independent test, which essentially reached the same results that the FBI report found. The gun was operational, the gun was in good condition, and it could not have misfired. It could not have fired the way that Alec Baldwin said it did. That scenario could not have happened. So what do you guys think? Are they going to refile these charges? I think the prosecution is scared. I think the prosecutors are scared because he's got big money. A lot of you are very, very skeptical, and so am I. I mean, I don't know why they dismissed the charges in the first place. The only thing I can think of is that, well, I can think of a lot of things. Let's put it that way. I just think they're scared. I think the prosecution is scared, and they think they don't have enough evidence. But I would like to think that a rational, right-thinking jury would be able to look at the evidence and go, yes, the guy who is the very last person to touch that weapon, who has an extensive history of handling firearms in movies over the last 40 years, whose father was a firearms instructor. Many of you might not know that. Alec Baldwin's father was a high school shooting coach. He was such a firearms expert that he essentially died of lead poisoning. Alec Baldwin's father was such a gun enthusiast and shooting coach that he basically died of lead poisoning. So this is the atmosphere he grew up in. He's been in movies for 40 years where he's done shooting, he's shot firearms, and I would like to think this jury, okay, with his background, he was the very last person to touch this weapon. This weapon that the FBI and this independent report has shown could not have fired unless he pulled the trigger, unless he cocked it and pulled the trigger. I would like to think a jury could do that. But I don't know. This isn't, New Mexico isn't a giant budget state like New York or California. They don't have the money that, say, the Los Angeles prosecutor's office or the New York City prosecutor's office would have. So I don't know. Maybe they're concerned about budgetary things. They just want to get the win. They're going after the weakest one of the group, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, who should be punished. I mean, she was at fault, but to let him off, the guy who literally cocked a weapon, pointed it at two human beings, and pulled the trigger, not being held at least responsible for negligent manslaughter, is astoundingly ridiculous to me. It literally makes zero sense. Shandy Graham Yellow Rock says, going after the lone or the weakest seems to be in the DNA of living beings. Well, you go for the easiest target. You go after even the animals. Yeah, they go after the sick and the weak because they're the easiest targets. They're the weakest. Same with the humans. Go after the one that can't fight back as well. Hard to think a regular person would get the similar treatment. Hannah Gutierrez Reed is a regular. She is a regular person. So you're seeing what a regular person would get. Yeah, if it was you or me that pulled a gun, that pointed a gun at somebody, we'd be in jail already. There's no question about that. Baldwin's lawyers would spend money using the Chewbacca defense. They only need one juror. Well, that's true, but I think that's what I was worrying about a second ago. I think they at least have to show that they're taking this seriously.